being creative in spiritual life. The truth is infinite, and infinite are its manifestations. The Upanishads are rich with innumerable descriptions of the mystics' experiences of the supreme reality. We have heard many times, truth is one. The sages call it by various names. The divine reality is vibrant within us and all around us. There is only one reality, one unbroken, homogeneous consciousness. And that, according to Vedanta, has been mistaken for the many. It's just as when we take a prism and we pass light through that prism, it's scattered into 7 different colors. When the actual truth is, the light itself is colorless. So this experience of supreme identity, of unitive consciousness, or non-duality, is referred to by all mystics, the surface of these infinite manifestations, and to perceive the source of all manifestation, that one infinite light. It is the seemingly multiplicity of all the thousands of things that we see around us, that we feel, that we touch, that we taste, that we hear, that we smell, that we think about. This is what deceives us. Somehow we have imputed a permanent reality to these various multiple things in this universe, as if each individual thing had its own distinct reality, when in truth there is no division whatsoever. So how do these divisions originate? Excuse me. And how can we dissolve them? What do the sages mean when they say truth is one, but is expressed through various names? What are these names? What is this diversity that we're facing? And it's in understanding the nature of diversity and facing this challenge of dissolving differences, of trying to see the one in the many, that being creative in our spiritual life becomes enormously beneficial to us. Now, if we just ask the simple question, why diversity? Why do we see multiple things? Well, this is equivalent to asking the age-old question, why Maya? And there's really no answer to this question for 2 reasons. One is ultimately, according to Vedanta and the experience of the mystics, this cosmic illusion of which we are all steeped doesn't really exist. So we can't find a cause for it. Second, our minds that are raising these questions are products of Maya. So for those 2 reasons, Maya itself can never be satisfactorily addressed or answered as why does this happen? We cannot we cannot find an answer to why, but we can find an answer. In spite of all of these limitations, we can posit a few reasons for these illusory divisions that cause so much confusion for us. And as I just said, according to Advaita Vedanta, there is only one existence. There's one reality. According to the mystic's vision, it's undivided, it's unchanging, it is self-luminous being. It's always fully manifest because that's all there is. Now, this reality, we can call it divinity, is equally present everywhere at all times. And as Swami Vivekananda, our modern sage, has told us, all we need to do is open our eyes and see it. It's right before us. Now, that's the good news. But the bad news is that superimposed upon this shining reality, through this cosmic Maya, are all of these infinite names and forms and colors and tastes and sounds and sensations and thoughts, etc., etc. Now, these divisions, metaphysically, we can say, they occur when there is this so-called bifurcation or split of consciousness into two. This is a result of Maya. So there is the subject, there is the object. I, who know all of this and all of these things out here that I know. And that's what we ordinarily perceive. Now, in his lecture, Sankhya and Vedanta, Swamiji explains this conundrum with which we are faced. He says, all difference is due to time, space, and causation. These are the constituent elements of the mind. No mentality is possible without them. You cannot think without time. You can never imagine anything without space. And you can never have anything without causation. These are all the forms of the mind. Take them away, and the mind itself does not exist. All difference, therefore, according to Swamiji, is due to the mind. So all of these divisions or separations are actually mental constructs superimposed upon one infinite being. All of these distinctions that we make between one thing or another are pure illusion. They seem to separate that which is in fact inseparable. There are no real dividing lines between things. Even at the molecular level, every so-called entity in this world is interpenetrated by every other entity. And this is according to quantum science. This is not according to the mystics. There's no real dividing lines. We are just not subtle enough to perceive that. So according to quantum, we never actually perceive divisions or barriers or separations. We just manufacture them. Physical objects simply result in the displacement of space, of infinite existence. And what I mean by this is, imagine one ocean, unbroken, of infinite existence, which is the truth. And then say you have a forest. And that forest is filled with various kinds of trees and undergrowth and animals and so on. All of those physical objects are displacing the infinite space that is there, that infinite existence. If you remove those physical objects, you take down the trees, you pull out the undergrowth, or you remove the animals, what remains? One unbroken existence, one unbroken space. If we remove the walls and the floor and the ceiling of this temple, what do we have? We merge with the infinite space that's on Vallejo Street or Broadway or Steiner Street, etc. We've enclosed ourselves in this space with these walls. It's the same thing that we're doing within our human bodies and within our minds. We enclose our infinite existence in something very small. So divisions and boundaries or barriers are not really part of reality. It's how we perceive reality, and it's how we edit reality. We are very good editors. So here's the very first hint at how we can deal creatively with diversity and with our spiritual life. And that is through the training and the proper use of our minds. Because it is the mind that is the culprit behind this division. It distorts our perception and makes us feel separate from others. Now, our thinking, which involves language, is one of the main issues. Words and symbols, even thoughts themselves, are all dividers. For whenever we think, whenever we talk, we are constantly creating divisions. I feel that I am, I feel that you are, that she is, he is, etc. Each a very distinct entity with sharply defined borders. And in our current state of ignorance, this is what we actually perceive to be true. Now, the nature of the untrained or unrefined mind, as we are now, is to simply accept this state of things unquestioningly. We accept it. What our senses and our mind bring to us, this is real. This is what we accept. But spiritual seekers want to push that. They want to examine it. They want to try to penetrate into the heart of things instead of floating on the surface and accepting these changing realities. Now, if we pause for a moment, all of us, just pause for a moment and analyze how your own thoughts, just in our ordinary daily thinking, fragments our experience. This is what thinking does. It's very subtle, and the mind moves very quickly, so we often think that we're having some kind of a whole perception, but in truth, it's broken up into millions of little pieces. So instead of perceiving the absolute ground of all phenomena, or the ground of our existence, we are continually making arbitrary divisions in our thinking, which are really only a matter of convenience. For example, just take how we consider, say, a landmass, how we've broken it up into countries, and we have borders, and we have no-fly zones, and we have counties, and we have cities, and we have certain mountain ranges, and we take a body of water and we say this is the Pacific Ocean, and we call it this is the Atlantic Ocean, and now this is the Gulf of Mexico, and this is the Arabian Sea, etc., etc. Even into cosmic space, how we divide it for planets and stars. So for a matter of convenience, we divide the universe into millions and millions of categories. And eventually, we start taking this fragmentation as if it were the truth, and we base our lives on it. It seems to assume its own existence, independent of our own thinking and willing. We just take it for granted. We go across the Golden Gate Bridge, and at some mystic moment, we've now left San Francisco County and we're entering Marin County. Is there a line there? We've arbitrarily have drawn this line, and we accept this. Now, the mystics go so far as to say, just as quantum does, that we do not perceive separate things, that we invent them. And in Vedantic language, especially in Swami Vivekananda's language, this is taking the unreal for the real. Swamiji says the whole universe is one. There is only one self in the universe, only one existence. And that existence is called by different names, all mental and physical forms. The whole universe as it exists is that being. It is unchanged, and all the changes that we see in it are only apparent. It is name and form that one thing is differentiated from another. The name and the form alone cause the difference. In reality, they are one and the same. Now, these are not just the words of Swami Vivekananda. These are actually his own experience. This is the experience of a great mystic. So the problem arises for us. As soon as we take all of this so-called multiplicity or diversity, these fabrications of name and form, and we mistake it for the reality itself. And this is what we're trying to undo in our spiritual life. Because what happens when we take this as a hard and fast reality, it results in the actual world appearing as a disjointed, fragmented something, which in truth, it's actually a seamless whole. So we can and we do make distinctions between things. But it's impossible to separate them. That's the point. Another way of looking at this is just to observe the natural world. Say you go out onto the great highway and you stand on the beach and you look out over into the infinite ocean, and there you can see where the ocean and the sky, they seem to come together. Or you may be standing on a mountaintop and you may be able to see a vast expanse of land, and at some point you feel like you can see a dividing line between, say, the land and the sky, or the sky and the ocean. So we can say that, in a way, these are divided, these lines, but simultaneously they unite and join the two. So they're not really divided. Now, the mystics emphasize that we cannot deny these distinctions. We're not going to call them differences. We're going to call them distinctions. They are there, but we need to see them for what they are, and that is transient. It's a big word. Unreal. Transient. Now, Shankaracharya has painstakingly explained this twilight of existence of ours as Vyavaharika Satya, or relative truth. Yes, this apparent concrete universe that seems to have so much substance, with millions of names and shapes and forms and levels of being, it does exist. We can't walk outside the temple here and say, these cars don't exist, these trees, the birds don't exist, these people don't exist, unless we want someone to call 911. That may be the result of that. Yes, they exist. But for how long did they exist? This is the question the sages put before us. If we say, we take the stand, well, it doesn't matter how long they exist. I'm born in this world, and I have a few years, and I'll eat, and I'll drink, and I'll be merry, and I'll enjoy a few things, and then I'm going to die. I'm okay with that. Fine. Then the spiritual quest is not for such a person. For spiritual seekers, they want something more. They want to go beyond this ever-changing world and find something that never changes. Why? Because all of us are seeking bliss, we're seeking happiness and satisfaction, we're seeking some kind of meaning here. And according to Vedanta and the mystics, the only way to find meaning here is to look below the surface. So if we examine and we say, how long did these things exist? And we say, well, they don't exist very long, but there's something within that transient form that does exist. That's the point. That which really exists in all the changing forms never changes. It never dies. And it is that which allows us to perceive these ever-changing forms in the first place. So the light within us, that which is within us that never dies, never changes, is ever the same, is that which perceives in an outside, so-called outside object, that which never dies, never changes, and is eternal. If we did not have that light of the Atman within, we could not perceive anything. So it's the spirit, the infinite spirit alone, which is real in all changing forms. These changing forms are continually breaking apart. They fall apart. They return to the original state of energy from which they emerged. But that which is eternal within all of these changing forms ever remains the same. So our mystics emphasize that at this level, we can never find oneness. At this level, at the relative level, we will always see difference only. And that is why they emphasize that by transcending relativity, by finding a center of awareness inside ourselves that transcends differences, or put in another way, discovering a ground that encompasses all difference, is the way to find the truth. The end result is the same in either case: one unbroken consciousness. And since it is expressly the divisions, the differences which we superimpose on reality that slice it up into all of these little individual parts and millions of categories, the mystic's experience that reality is free of parts, free of these little divisions or slicing up of reality, is another way of saying that truth is free from all distinctions. Now let's just take a minute and analyze how we can substantiate this statement of the mystics. How can we substantiate it short of our own experience? What is the source of all of these divisions? We've just said this cosmic Maya is the source. And our individual self, our idea of who we think we are, is part of this Maya. It's all in how we conceive of ourselves. And just by the way, the word person is derived from the Latin word persona, which means a mask or a facade. So this mental construct that we have of ourselves, if we were to go around and ask each one of us were to ask each other, how do you think of yourself? And that's a very relevant philosophical and spiritual question. What is our reality? Who do we think we are? You know how we have an argument with someone and that person says, who does she think she is? Or who does he think he is? That's a very valid point. Who does she think she is? Maybe if she knew who she was, she wouldn't have this problem. So we have this mental idea of ourselves. And it's this idea upon which we base our whole universe, unfortunately. Everything that we think, everything that we feel, everything that we do originates from this idea of self. This is another hint on how we can deal creatively. We need to shift how we think about ourselves. This sense that I exist, the self-awareness that we have inside ourselves, this is what establishes us as a separate being. So I feel I exist as this person, this shape, this form, this mind. Automatically, if I identify with this, then I am excluding myself from that. I'm defining myself as this small something. And by extension, when we do that, we exclude ourselves and separate ourselves from everyone else and everything in the universe. It's almost as if we draw a mental line like this across the entire field of our experience, this imaginary line, and we say everything that's out here on the other side of the line has nothing to do with me. It's not me. And everything on this side of the line is me, as I think of myself. So in doing that, psychologically, what we are actually doing is creating a space between ourselves and the environment where no space exists. So in other words, our self-identity depends entirely upon where we draw this line. And we'll see in a minute that the mystics, they don't have a line drawn because their self has expanded. Now, our physical body defines our self as matter, which is identified with sensations internally and externally, and we have a location in space. I'm taking up a certain amount of space here. I'm displacing space, just like the trees in a forest. This physical body, this lump of matter, is how I define my physical self. It encompasses our ordinary experience of reality in this relatively, what we think, stable, concrete world in which we act in our daily life. And then intellectually and emotionally, our mind forms the dividing line. But there's a black hole here in our experience, a big hole. It's a gap in our awareness that seriously needs to be investigated by spiritual seekers. The truth is so obvious, it is self-evident, according to our sages. It's so obvious, it's like a fruit in the palm of one's hand. That's what they say as an example. That's how close we are to truth. Just like holding, they say in Amalaki, we can say a golden delicious apple in our hand. but we're missing it somehow. Why? Why isn't it obvious to us? Our true self, according to the mystics, is transparent awareness itself. This pure existence. That's our true nature. It's the ground of all of our thoughts, all of our feelings, all of our actions, and even our so-called misplaced identity. Now, this truth self, it's impossible to objectify it. And the scriptures are full of examples of this, especially the Upanishads. So let's take one example. Let's take the example of hearing. So sometime when you're in your room or you're someplace where it's relatively quiet, just close your eyes and be attentive to everything that you hear around you without responding to it. So maybe say you can hear fire sirens blaring or car alarms going off or dogs barking or children laughing, whatever. So you hear all of these various sounds going on. Now, no matter how hard any of us try to hear, there's one thing that we can't hear, no matter how sharp our hearing is. According to the Upanishads, we can never hear the hearer of sounds. The hearer can never be objectified. We can't stand on our own shoulders. Self can never be an object, our true self. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad says you cannot see the seer of sight. In other words, we can't objectify it. We can hear things, we can see things, but we cannot see that which sees or that which hears. We cannot think the thinker of thoughts. We cannot know the knower of knowledge. Now, interestingly, just like in this example that I've just given about not being able to hear the hearer of sounds, our everyday consciousness contains a transcendent element. But we miss it. Why do we miss it? Because we have etched innumerable distinctions and divisions within our consciousness. And we rehearse those again and again, again and again. This is how we live our lives. It's sort of like one of those old long-playing records, and the needle gets stuck in a groove, and it goes round and round and round on the same tune. That's kind of what we do mentally. So we go round and round until we break out of that. So in our everyday lives, instead of seeing this pure existence, trying to isolate out this pure existence, our true self, from all of the diversity that we're immersed in, we are stuck in the groove. And our true self remains hidden from view. Even though it's sitting there, just like the fruit on the palm of our hand, we're missing it. So it's impossible to locate the self, our true self. We can't locate it. There's no division whatsoever in it. So we should remember that whatever we can conceptualize, it's already an object of awareness. It's not awareness itself. So the conclusion of Vedanta is the self can be experienced, but it can't be located. It can't be seen or known in the way that we see and know everything else in this world, including our own body and mind, because these are limited. The self is unlimited. Now, the great ones say in an enlightened state, beyond our ordinary experience of space and time and causation and all the millions of things that we see now as different from us when in fact they aren't, an individual sense of identity expands. Consciousness expands when we touch that center of the self. And it goes far beyond the confines of our own body and mind and embraces the entire cosmos. So for one who is illumined, there is no line, as I mentioned. There's no line drawn separating themselves from everything else in the universe because their self has become everything in the universe. In the Song of the Sannyasin, Swamiji has a line, and he says, "The I has all become. The all is I and bliss. It's worth meditating on. That's Swamiji's experience. His eye had expanded, including the entire universe. So the I has all become the all is I and bliss. Whatever is divine. The Shvetashvatara Upanishad tells us, as oil and sesamum seeds, as butter and cream, as water in riverbeds, as fire inherent in wood, so is the self realized in one's own soul if one looks for him with truthfulness and austerity. The self which pervades all things as butter is contained in milk, which is the root of self-knowledge and austerity, that is the Brahman. That is the highest mystic doctrine. That is the highest mystic doctrine. So there you have it. This is the highest mystic doctrine. The self pervades all things as butter is contained in milk. The Rishi, Shvetashvatara, declared very poetically, you are a woman, you are a man, you are the youth, and you are the maiden. You, as an old man, totter along with a staff. Being born, you are facing in every direction. You are the dark blue butterfly. You are the green parrot with red eyes. You are the cloud with the lightning passing through it. You are the seasons, and you are the oceans. You are without beginning and beyond all time and space. This is the truth as declared by the Upanishad. And now the game begins. We are faced with the challenge of erasing these divisions, this diversity, creatively, by trying to perceive that one being who pervades all things as butter pervades milk. After all, according to Sri Ramakrishna, this whole universe is Divine Mother's Leela. It's her divine play. Our job is to learn how to play the game intelligently and skillfully. Now, 2 hints are given in the Kena Upanishad. It's a very small but powerful Upanishad that gives a subtle psychological analysis that is suggestive that the Atman that we've been speaking about can be intuited by detaching oneself from the functions of the mind and the senses. Now, this can only be done through the intuitive faculty, so to speak, of the Atman itself, for the senses can never perceive it. In the second verse of part 1, the preceptor instructs the disciple. It is the Atman, the spirit, by whose power the ear hears, the eye sees, the tongue speaks, the mind understands, and life functions. The wise one separates the Atman from these faculties, transcends the life of the senses, and attains immortality. So the idea conveyed here in the Kena Upanishad is that the senses, the mind, even life itself, in and of themselves, they are inert. And the Sanskrit word is jada, inert. It's the Atman that is the sole intelligent principle within us. By its presence, it enables all of our senses and our mind to function. So in our spiritually ignorant state, where we are now, we attribute intelligence to inert matter and we identify ourselves, the Atman, with it. That's what happens. But those who are wise, they don't make this mistake. They don't identify the two. Their identification is with the vast one, and thus they attain immortality. Further, the teacher instructs in the Kena, and I think this is one of the most salient teachings we can find that underlies all of our spiritual practices. Atman is really known when it is known in and through every modification of the mind. And the Sanskrit is pratibodha viditam. For by such knowledge one attains immortality. Amritatvam vindate. We attain immortality when we recognize that in and through every mental modification, the Atman is already present. That's how close it is to us. It's close as a heartbeat. Okay, as mentioned earlier, our Atman and our self is never an object of experience like any other object, like any sense object, or even any thought. But along with every single mental modification of thought that gives rise to these relative existence, the Atman, as it were, pervades everything, just as butter and milk. For it is the light of the Atman which gives self-awareness to all our thoughts. In fact, we couldn't even feel that we exist if it were not for the light of the Atman. That's how close it is. The fact that you are cognizant that you are sitting here, that I am standing here, that so many, just that very light of awareness is the Atman itself revealing itself. It's right there, like a fruit on the palm of the hand, and yet we're missing it. And it's so obvious. It's the very thing that gives us this idea that I exist. How we exist is a different issue. We've gone through that. We want to change our identity. But the fact is, we exist. And no one can convince us otherwise. Can anyone convince you that you don't exist? How can I convince you? You say, no, I exist. You may give physical, reasons for your existence. You may justify it through the mental process. You may write a dissertation about it, and other person may argue. But the fact is, I feel, I exist. Now, the purpose of all of our spiritual practices is just this: to disentangle our true self from this nexus of diversity, so-called diversity. That's the whole point of our spiritual practices. So the Atman is the witness. If we can remember this, the Atman is the witness to every single thought, every single cognition that we have in all the states of existence, in our waking state, in our dream state, in our sleep state, deep sleep, in any other state of existence that we have, the Atman is present. Now, if we can achieve that level of awareness, even to a small degree in our meditation, then we will become aware simultaneously that in and through all of these thoughts, states, feelings, there is a simultaneous revelation of the Atman. And as expressed in the Kena Upanishad, pratibodha viditam, in every single modification of thought, the Atman is present. So for spiritual seekers, emphasizing that the Atman is present in this way and is revealing itself in every thought, as I just mentioned, in state of our being, is a tremendous incentive to our spiritual practice. It's not like it's out there somewhere, or we have to go into a cave or a mountaintop, or years and years and years of sadhana. It's right here. And when we remember this verse in the Kena Upanishad, then in every meditation, even when we're trying to meditate or calm our minds, the very attempt to do that, the Atman is present. We constantly remind ourselves. It's through the presence of ourself that we can even attempt this kind of thought. So the Atman is always present, and our every thought is proof, according to the Kena Upanishad. Now, in order to have the enthusiasm and the willpower to forge ahead in our spiritual sadhana, in spite of all obstacles, all of the problems that arise because of this diversity and the tenacious hold that Maya has on us, we have to make these ideas, the ideal that we have, real in our lives. Somehow or other, This is where being creative comes in. If we have a continual disconnect between our thoughts, what we think, this is what we think, and this is our ideal, and so on, and what's actually real for us in our daily lives, it spreads the bifurcation. It emphasizes the division. Somehow we have to make our idea real for us, each individual in our lives. Otherwise, our attempts appear to be fruitless. They're never fruitless, but they begin to seem that way because there seems to be such a gap, such a divide between that which is real, really real, and what's real for me right now as a housewife, as a school teacher, as whatever, computer scientist. How can I bring these things so they become living, vibrant realities for me now, not 25 years from now, not when I retire, etc. So it's something like trying to swim upstream. It's really difficult. And for a long time, our teachers tell us it is difficult. It is like swimming upstream because we have to make a tremendous effort to go against, so to speak, all the forces in the universe. We're trying to come out of the universe instead of going along with nature. As Swamiji says, we have to become outlaws. We have to go beyond nature. So we have to push against nature. And that takes a lot of effort, continual, repeated effort. And the way that we can help in our daily lives is however we choose to think about these things, we need to try to implement them in our lives. So our thoughts should be reflected in our daily lives. Now, all of us have certain capabilities. If we went around the room here and we ask each person, what's your interest? What do you do for recreation? Etc. So we may be musically gifted, we may be a scientist, as I mentioned before, a housewife or a teacher. It doesn't matter what we are or what we do, but each one of us has a natural bent of mind. We have certain capabilities, we have certain proclivities, talents, abilities, and so on. Now it's possible, and not only is it possible, we should utilize whatever comes naturally to us, whatever our natural bent of mind, whatever our temperament is. We should take those interests and try to directly or indirectly turn them in our spiritual life. How? By focusing our attention that the infinite reality runs in and through every single one of our interests. Maybe we're a gardener. Maybe we're a business person. We own our own. Whatever our interests are, whatever our proclivities are, wherever our mind naturally tends to run, we can take advantage of that. That's the point. We can't become, again, we can't jump on our own shoulders. We can't become something that we're not. We have to utilize what we already have. We have to start, those board games. Start here, you start, and you try to make your way to the home. Home free. So all aspects of our personality and everything that we're interested in, as the Kena Upanishad reminds us, is pervaded by the Atman. That light illumines every thought and every action. And before any thought or action can even arise or happen for us, the Atman is present. It's one step ahead of us, so to speak. So ordinarily, we're used to compartmentalizing our lives. Our job occupies a certain amount of hours, and then we have, say, a certain amount of recreation time, or downtime, or entertainment time, whatever. In our spiritual life, it should be just the opposite. For us, our spiritual life should be 24/7. So we're not going to spend X number of hours doing our professional work, and then that's over, and then we'll spend another X number of hours in our spiritual practices. Right there, as we mentioned just a few minutes ago, this is how we fragment our experience. We do it to ourselves through our mental process. So what we want to do is try to make our spiritual life a seamless reality that matches the true reality in our lives. We want to integrate it in our lives. And although in the beginning, maybe it'll seem a bit contrived, we try to imagine the divine presence in everything and in everyone, and that again, according to our own mental makeup. Perhaps we choose to think that every woman that comes to us is the form of the Divine Mother, or we see Jesus or whatever, and people that come toward, or we see our own selves reflected everywhere. Maybe it seems contrived at first when we go on persisting in this effort, we will find it becomes second nature. And because it's based on truth, eventually truth reveals itself when we push the boundaries. So we're always trying to push the boundaries in our spiritual life. We're always trying to push or expand that line of self-identity. Let us think of it in that way. How do we ask yourself now and then, how do I think of myself? Don't worry about how does the other person think of you or what do I think of the other person. That's irrelevant. The only relevant thing to us is what is real for me. What is my reality? Is body my reality? Is just matter reality for me, or no? I'm a little more refined than that. Maybe I'm more identified. My mind is my reality. I love my music. I love to think philosophical thoughts. I'm a great artist. Now and then we should ask ourselves, what is real for me? How do I think of myself? And if that falls short of how we want to think of ourselves, then that's where we need to emphasize more. No, I'm not. I may be that. Yes, I have this body and a strong body and I can swim 45 laps without stopping, or I can do all those things, but I'm something more. I have a spiritual dimension to my being, and I think it behooves me to spend more time and attention on that aspect of my being than another aspect of my being that will fade as my senses fade, my memory will fade, I'll get arthritis, I won't be able to play the piano, I'm not going to be able to run, beta breakers. All of these things are going to happen. Why? Well, the physical undergoes changes and the mind starts to slip. But when we emphasize our spiritual dimension, that never slips because it's eternal, it's ever the same. So each one of us has to emphasize and utilize our own particular creative genius. Let's put it that way, our own imagination. We have to utilize our talents and abilities that we have naturally and simultaneously learn to deal with reality creatively. Both have to happen at the same time. And this is how we make truth our own. And this in and of itself, as I mentioned in the beginning, truth has infinite manifestations. And therefore, there are an infinite number of doors that we can go through in order to access the truth. We're not limited. We have to go this way or we have to do it in that way. No, we have an infinite number of possibilities before us. We have an infinite number of attitudes and ways that we can approach it. The point is, how far can we exercise our imagination and utilize our own creativity to bring this out? Now, Swami Tridayananda, one of Sri Ramakrishna's disciples, used to say, today's imagination is tomorrow's reality. Now, the Swami here is not referring to what we ordinarily think of as imagination. What we usually think of as imagination, generally we imagine something. Well, that may not be actually attainable, or it may not be something that's perceivable. It may not be something present to our senses. It's sort of a flight of, fancy. The imagination that Swami Tridayananda is referring to is an imagination based on truth. So in our present state of awareness, we may not be able to perceive the underlying reality, but we can base our practices on the fact that the underlying reality is there. That's the fact. And that's the use of creative imagination, because it's imagination based on fact, not based on some kind of fanciful idea that may never be attainable. This is totally attainable because it's already our own. So that's the challenge. We have to think of ways that we can effectively exercise this kind of imagination. I cannot stand up here and say, well, this is how you should utilize your imagination. This is a matter of trying to present certain tools that we can all utilize, because each one of us has a different mental makeup. And we're all individuals in that sense. Relatively we are. And we have to utilize those things to go beyond that which confines us to our current state. So we certainly need to think out of the box. We do need to do that. Why? Because the mind is really mechanical, and it tends to run in grooves and ruts and taking the path of least resistance. But when we go on persisting and we affirm and we reaffirm this truth in our own creative way, the truth will reveal itself because it's self-revealing. Now, in our daily life, we make associations. This is how we attempt to bring some kind of chaos out of this world. This is philosophically what we mean when we say, oh, this is a relative world. Well, everything is in relation to everything else. We're all interdependent, interrelated. None of us can deny that. So through these interrelationships, we form certain associations in our minds. And these associations are generally based on our mental construct, how we think of ourselves, say as a body, as a mind, and right now it's sort of a vaguely spiritual being. That's how we think of ourselves. But when we think and imagine creatively, what we are actually doing is changing our attitudes and our usual modes of thought. This is what any creative genius does. We become more innovative. And when we become more innovative, we can learn how to make new associations, form different relationships, discover hidden patterns and connections between things. I mean, creativity is often associated with making a leap of insight. And a person sort of transcend traditional ways of thinking about things or the normal patterns and relationships. A creative genius makes that intuitive or insightful leap. Now, this is what we can say ordinarily distinguishes, say, a regular physics professor from an Einstein, or a fairly good concert pianist, say, from a Bach or a Beethoven. There's this creative leap of genius that enables such a person to find certain patterns. Any great scientist that you study, you will find this. How did they come up with these truths? These self-evident truths of nature are there before all of us. Why don't we discover them? For this reason. We need to be able to make this creative leap. When we can do this, it expands our way of thinking, and our consciousness and our awareness become more acute and more comprehensive. We become more alive and more self-aware. Now, once a woman devotee approached Sri Ramakrishna, and she was complaining that she could not keep her mind concentrated on God. Sri Ramakrishna said, "What's the problem? Why can't you, what's wrong? What's taking your mind away from God?" "Oh, it's my nephew. I have tremendous love and attachment for my nephew, and at time of prayer, all I can think of is my nephew. I can't take my mind off of him." Now, instead of telling her to become non-attached to the boy and giving her a big lecture like I'm doing, he told her to consider that nephew as the baby Krishna, as Gopala. That's all he said to her. Just consider that nephew as the embodiment of Lord Krishna. Now, this woman devotee was very sincere. She didn't ask 100 questions. She took exactly literally what Sri Ramakrishna said, and she put it into practice. She didn't change anything that she was doing, but she changed how she thought about her nephew. And she learned to form a new association. And this woman, it is said, attained a very high state of spiritual enlightenment through this simple practice. She didn't change what she was doing. She didn't ignore her nephew. She continued to treat her nephew in the same way with the same loving attention, but she changed her ideas about it. She reformed an association of why she was doing what she was doing. So when faced with this challenge, all of us can come up with creative ways that we can dye our minds, how we can spiritualize our mental samskaras. You know, if we buy a new home, we can see this all around the city here. People, they construct a place, it's almost to completion, and then they sell it, somebody else moves in, they tear it apart and repaint it and redo it. So this is what we're doing all the time. We want to refashion things to our own tastes. So in spiritual life, we need to remodel our thoughts, and we need to form new associations. So whatever comes through us, through our senses or our minds, that tries to reinforce that you're a body, you're a mind, then we try to recast that perception by covering it with the divine. The Isha Upanishad, a very small Upanishad with just 18 verses, the very first verse is said to contain the entire teaching of Vedanta. And that verse is Isha Bhasyam Idagam Sarvam Yat Kincha Jagatyam Jagata. Whatever exists in this changing world is enveloped by the Lord. Now here the Upanishad is simultaneously telling us two things. It's telling us the truth. Everything is enveloped by the Lord or the divine, and it's giving us the practice. What is the practice? Cover everything with the divine. The truth is everything is pervaded by the divine, like butter and cream, as the Svetasvatara told us. As Swamiji says in his lecture, God in everything, God is in everything. Where else shall you find him? Where will you go? He is already in every work. He is already in every thought and every feeling. And as the Kena Upanishad pointed out, pratibodha viditam, in every mental modification, the Atman is present. So we're not acquiring anything. The Atman is already there. We are simply trying to bring it out through our own creative spiritual practices. The second part, the practice, is to consciously cover everything with the divine, everything that comes to us. In other words, it's the deification of the world. As Swami Vivekananda very simply and beautifully tells us, just give up the world as we think of it. He's not telling us to give up the world. Give up how you think about it. Know it as it appears to all of us. It's based upon our own weaknesses, our own faulty reasoning, our partial experiences, etc. Swamiji says, give up these false ways of looking at things and know it for what it really is, the Lord himself. So the ends and the means are ultimately the same. I would like to close with Swamiji's translation of several verses of this Isha Upanishad. These are Swamiji's words. He is inside everything. He is outside everything, interpenetrating everything. Whoever sees in every being that same Atman, and whoever sees everything in that Atman, that person never goes far from the Atman. When all life and the whole universe are seen in this Atman, then alone a person attains the secret. There is no more delusion for such a one.